Ex-cons of Reddit, what's the most terrifying thing you saw inside of prison?
My brother said a guy across from him had a new cellmate who had gastrointestinal problems and wouldn't stop farting these rancid horrible farts after the guy told him repeatedly to stop, not like he could help it, so the guy beat the farter to death in their cell with his bare hands. My brother said he had never seen so much blood from one person before.
A dude got 2 full kettles of boiling water poured on his head. And a convicted murderer explaining how he killed, dismembered with an angle grinder then disposed of the body.
I did a 4-month stint in Kajang, Malaysia. This Nigerian dude used to pilfer from other cells. This Malay gang found him and dipped his hand in boiling oil, basically deep-fried it while it was still attached to him. That scream, it still curdles my blood. Poor guy was reduced to an unconscious pool of blood, sweat, tears, vomit, shit and piss. He lost more than his hand on that day.
I was in a South American prison. There was a lot of drug addicts. They usually sold their food in order to buy more drugs, so they were always hungry. One day I was eating my lunch, rice, a leg of chicken and some beans. When I finished my meal there were some chicken bones left in my plate, and a drug addict approached me to ask if I could gift him the chicken bones. So I lent him my bones and he started eating them. It was heartbreaking.
A guy got stomped to death my first day in. The 2 guys fighting were rival gang members. The guards didn't do anything until the guy getting stomped stopped breathing. Then they came in and took them both away. One in a bag and one in cuffs.
Dude in the cell next to mine tried to kill himself with a sharpened pencil. He just kept stabbing himself in the chest, but couldn't get deep enough. He was hauled off by COs kicking and screaming, begging for death. He was going to be deported.
Boiling hot peanut butter dumped on a sleeping child molester's face. The screaming and thrashing was pretty intense. The idea is that you can't wipe it off or something to mitigate the damage caused, it's going to burn deeply. And in my opinion, that was worse than watching a guy on the bench press take a 35 cave plate smash to the skull repeatedly. He was dead pretty quickly. The peanut butter burn is a permanent disfigurement that will have months of pain and suffering.
I was never in prison, but in jail a bit for drug charges. I was in my 30s, but my bunkie was a really nice 19-years-old kid in there for selling drugs. He seemed a bit over his head, but introduced me to the jits. I didn't know anyone, and we'd play cards and shit. He had a real high bond, and one day they said to get his shit he got bail. He didn't know who, but I was so happy for him. The next morning the co told me he was shot and killed that night. Being very respectful, everyone liked the guy. It was confirmed on the evening news. Really fucked me up, and I can guess who got him bailed.
Brixton, a wing. Coming back from canteen, this scary-looking wild-eyed dude steps across and tells me to hand over my burn/tobacco. I laugh and say no and walk by, waiting for him to do something. Nothing happened. Few minutes later, same guy opened some poor lad's stomach with one slash and he was lying there trying to hold his intestines in. I saw the fear and panic on his face. The scary guy just casually walked away. No idea what happened to either of them. Alarms went off. Everyone back to their cells and locked up again.
I don't know if this counts, but my dad was in prison with Richard Speck, who is, if you don't know, an American mass murderer who brutally murdered and raped 8 nurses. My dad told me during his time in prison, Speck bragged about what he did all the time, and said prison was a wonderful vacation for him, and he would do it all again if he had the chance. He would even go as far as saying how much he loved to kill those women. So sickening. Speck also made porn in prison, which I'm sure is on the internet somewhere.
Just the way that some people talk about murder. Some of the people in there would be telling a story, casually drop the fact that they killed someone, then keep going on with the story like nothing happened.
I saw someone take a hot pot, fill it up with baby oil, add a pound of sugar, add some magic shave, bring it to a boil, then splash it in a person's face. It literally melted the guy's face off. This happened around 1999, and I still have the occasional nightmare about it.
Not a crazy story, but was in for a few days and didn't realize they put you in cells based on the color of your skin. I'm a white dude with a Hispanic last name and they put me in a cell with a straight Nazi who told me if I went to actual prison, I was only in for a weekend, that I would be a misfit because I wasn't one thing or the other. He openly called the black dudes next to our cell horrible things.
I'm not a con, but my dad told me when he was upstream, guards informed them that they had a high-case child rapist coming in. When the guy got there, he ended up being this old white man walking with a cane. He didn't last very long on the courtyard. They killed him on the prison yard.
CO here. Had a guy stick a full-size number 2 pencil in his leg, the long way, insert it into his thigh, and shoved it under the skin until you couldn't see it anymore. Took him to the hospital to have it removed. Days later, he did the same thing, in the same hole, with a rubberized pencil. Rinse and repeat, hospital removes the pencil again. Couple days later, while on active suicide watch, he managed to jam part of a styrofoam cup, playing cards, and cocking from a cell window into his leg pocket. Took him to the OR, doctors pulled out another inch of wood pencil lead, and fragments of God knows what out of there. I don't even think he knew what all was in there. Edit, obviously major mental health concerns here. Hope he's doing okay now.
Relayed by a friend, but he said the craziest thing about prison is how you inevitably meet someone who is more psychotic/sociopathic than the next guy. You think you've seen it, met some bad dudes on the streets, but there's always a bigger fish.
Be me, skinny white kid, got back from my job in the canteen filling orders to everyone in my unit making O shapes with their hands. Didn't understand. Got to my cell, C.O unlocked it, and there's a massive black man loudly sleeping on the top bunk. Says, "Oh yeah. You got a new roommate," and slams the door shut. He was actually chill, and oddly enough, he never asked for bottom bunk status, so I actually got a lot of credit in the unit for that, but for those first few days. It turns out those O shapes were people telling me how big my asshole was going to be when he was done with me. First 2 months in. Also, being the front unit of the place and seeing all the ambulances come and go after code yellows and blues. In fact, just the code blues being called and everyone having to go back to their cell and knowing somebody is getting fucked up enough to need an ambulance.
In a similar thread, I remember a response about hearing inmates grind their shivs all night before a riot, knowing you'd be fighting for your life soon.
Not an ex-con, but prison admin staff. Right before I started working there, a man was on a classification override at my facility, meaning he was too dangerous to be at this prison, but got to be there for some reason. He was psychotic and talking nonsense to his 2 cellmates when all of a sudden he screamed he was the devil and gouged out a man's eyes while the other cellmate was frantically hitting the emergency button. Responding staff had mandated in-house therapy as a result. Horrific. Another was when I was working. A young man in for gang stuff brutally beat to death an old man who was just admitted for child crimes. Turns out the man raped this kid's younger sister. They didn't have the same last name, and she wasn't listed to classification staff, so no one knew. Responding staff said his head was kicked in so hard it was unrecognizable and had a consistency of jello.
Some forensic photos the guy in the cell next to me showed me of his victims, corpses. He killed them after he tortured them, in gang-related abductions. He removed a tattoo with an electric sander, and knives in both eye sockets, still in. They were part of his trial evidence.
Massive open wound flesh gashes down to the bone made by herself on her forearms and top of the legs that she used to hide things in, like paintbrushes, coffee rations, pens, etc. I could literally see her bones.
Okay, so unfortunately, my bunk was close to the corner where everybody came to fight or whatever. So this one guy claimed that he was a gang member, but it was discovered that he was a false flagger. So, the gang members put him in the corner and took turns beating and raping him. He was in the infirmary for about a week. When he came back, the gang got him all over again. He was transferred after that. I promise there aren't many things more terrifying than hearing a grown man scream while he's being raped.
A white kid get absolutely destroyed for accidentally sitting on the front bench of the TV area on his second day. They waited for Rec, then started walking with him. Every lap they made, more guys would tag along. Then once in the blind spot, they jumped him. 6 to 7 guys beating a 120 pounds skinny little white kid. They were climbing up the fence and jumping down on his head. He was out within the first few seconds, but they kept on beating him until the COs gassed everyone. They snapped his lower back and he is now in a wheelchair. All for not knowing any better. The worst thing I've ever heard was a grown man being raped one night. He refused to pay a protection fee and 3 dudes raped him. They stabbed him in the ass with a toothbrush shank. I've seen some crazy shit, but theirs were the most memorable. Sometimes I have nightmares about the rape. I've never heard anything like that ever since.
I've had ex-cons as clients. One saw his friend get stabbed a lot to death and couldn't jump in to help him, or he'd get stabbed too. Same guy was in charge of removing gang patches from other inmates. Patches, in this case, meant tattoos. You don't see many elderly gangsters for a reason.
Pretty tame compared to what I've been reading, but I was in a juvenile correctional center, not juvie, think long-term sentences for juveniles, where a buddy of mine was on a unit that was short-staffed, so he had to be on the sex offender unit. While he was there, he told me that the pedophiles would joke on each other that your victim was 7 years old. Oh yeah? Your victim was 4 years old. Yeah. Well, you still masturbate to your victim. At least I didn't rape my brother. Needless to say, he was horrified. Edit, horrified, not mortified.
Hey, so if I were to end up in prison, and I basically said, I'm just here to do my time, I'll comply to whatever rules, guidelines, etc., what are the odds I get left alone?
Father has assault charges. Was in juvie, my bad, forgot the word for kid, prison for 5 years. 1982 to 1987, he was friends with someone he didn't know was a rapist. He was forced to beat him up, or he would be killed, for sympathizing with a rapist.
It wasn't what I saw, it was the sound and smell of my cellmate constantly farting.
Inmates being denied medical treatment until they are dead. I saw it twice. Both were diabetics, both elderly, neither had family support, and both had conditions exacerbated by the inhumane housing situation. In South Texas heat, they lock up 56 men per dorm in poorly ventilated metal buildings. On lockdown, they require you to stay in your bunk on a plastic mattress for weeks, only allowed a 5-minute shower every 3rd day. I was 40 and in decent shape, and I thought I might die there. In the afternoons, the wall next to me was so hot I couldn't leave my hand on it. Shame on TDCJ and all of the employees. They put people in a terrible situation and we allow it to continue. If they treated dogs like that, there would be pitchforks. End of rant.
After reading these stories, I hope that I never have to go to a prison ever.